Hello, and welcome to Needle and Hearth, where we're all about curating the lost arts. From sewing and homesteading and everything in between, let's dive into some creativity and let's have fun together. Today I am making a corded petticoat, but since my closet is really small, having a bunch of petticoats to fit the different lengths of skirts I have is not practical. So I came up with a way to make one petticoat that will hopefully work for all my skirts. I had this bed sheet hanging around for years. Yes, I know it's tan, not traditional white, but I want it gone. It is stash busting time. First thing I gotta do is get rid of all these seams. So, seam ripping time. Whoops. Watch out for that seam ripper. Why would I even bother seam ripping all of this and risk ripping my fabric as I just did? It was because on each side I managed to gain an extra 3 inches, and across the top I gained an extra 9. This allowed me to have the width that I actually wanted. When I did my original measurements and plotting, I thought I was going to have to go with a slightly skinnier petticoat. Nope, I got the full fluffiness that I wanted. A lot of pressing and even more starch to get it to be smooth. Lots of starch. So I don't even bother cutting, since this is all straight lines. I just rip and rip. I just love that. Rip, 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 rip. Ripping is much more efficient than cutting. You get perfectly straight lines, and everything is done in the matter of moments. This was my plan: 2 bottom pieces lining an outer layer, a single layered yoke, and a waistband that will be folded in fourths. I chose this because it would have the best fabric utilization, and the extant garments I have seen and what other people have done, they've done the double layer in the bottom that holds the cording, and then it goes up into a single layer for at the waistband to reduce bulk around the waist. Here I have sewn the 2 bottom pieces together along their bottom edge, then folded that in half to create a very long tube, sewing that seam. I try to get the bottom seam to line up along the side seam, so when it is turned out, it will all line up and lay flat. Here, I'm just trying to get everything turned out, all the seams inside, and just make sure it all looks good. You can see already how bulky it is, and we're not even done or have even added any cording. For cording, I just used this macrame cotton cord that I found at my local craft store. I'm sure you can find some in your local area. To get the cording in, you need to go in through your open top, if your fabric will actually cooperate with you. But once you finally get in there, get your cording down to the bottom, get it pressed up good and tight against that seam. And I used a zipper foot through this so I can get as close to the cording as possible. And I just sewed this in a continuous spiral. I didn't cut the cord until the very end. This is just much more efficient, and there's also extant garments that have done this, though quite a few extant garments they actually have the cording woven into the fabric, but unfortunately we don't have that option anymore. So we have to sew it in. As you can see, it's just a little bit tedious. Just make sure all your layers are nice and even. You're not getting any weird puckers, especially on your lining layer. Here you can already see how stiff it's getting. And here I have skipped ahead for you guys to my next layer, where you can see where I'm going up into the second. You can just see how, you just swoop up over the top of it and just keep going and going and going and going. Make sure you keep your cord nice and tight up against your last seam. It does make a difference. You want this as stiff as you can make this. That's the whole point of this. Just showing off how it already looks and with the 2 layers. Now we're on our 3rd layer. This one is being a little booger. Once we get past this annoying guy, just still keep your cords nice and tight. Keep tugging on the bottom side of your fabric to make sure you don't get any folds. What you don't see is I did have to stop and pop a few stitches because I got a couple of puckers on the lining side, and that would affect the outcome later, so I just wanted that taken care of and fixed. So just go slow, get something good on to listen to, favorite podcast, some good tunes, a nice TV show. And here's the 4th layer, really starting to stiffen up. You can definitely start seeing that. Here we are coming towards the end. I have my end bit go past where I started, so we don't end up having the beginning and the end stacked up too close to each other. Get to your center, grab your scissors, grab some good scissors, and chop off where you want it to end. Careful not to grab your fabric and cut things again. And you just go back to sewing and make your top edge meet your last lining piece so your ends don't start fraying through. And the fat cords are done! Now on to the rest. For the rest of the cording, I used a much thinner cord. It probably has to be like a quarter of what this fat bottom was. There was no rhyme or reason for the placements I chose. I just chose something that visually appealed to me. So the spacing between the fat cord and the skinnier cords was going to be getting smaller, and then the number of cording was going to be also getting smaller. So like I did a layer of 5 for the fat, and then the next layer I did 4, then 3, then 2, and then the space in between again was like 3, 2, and 1. So first thing you need to do is establish the stitching line for where the cording will be bumped up against to, but then after that it's the same as the fat, just much skinnier, and just get it down in there nice and snug. This one was also much easier just because it was skinnier, and also I had a lot of practice from the fatter stuff. just round and round we go. And 3 episodes of Stargate Atlantis later, all the cording is done. So now onto the yoke. I am going to flat fell this seam to make sure there's just no raw edges. It just makes it last longer and then look better. This petticoat will be getting abuse, like all my other petticoats. So you will sew a normal seam, and then you will come through and trim one side of your seam allowance, just one layer, and you will cut it to be about half of the width you did give yourself. And then you will wrap the untrimmed layer around the trimmed layer, tucking every raw edge so it's unseen. Here you can see where I whoopsed again. My scissors went a little crazy, and oh, there it is. I cut onto the wrong side, but this is fine. I can stitch over it, and I got everything secure, and it should hopefully not cause any problems later. I do have this wonderful foot. It has a little guide on it, a little metal guide. You press it up against your seam allowance or your raw edge or your folded edge, and then it just allows you to stitch a nice straight stitch all the way across. For attaching the yoke to this skirt, I decided to also do a flat felled seam. This time I decided to do a little bit fatter than what I had done for just the yoke seam. The skirt is pretty heavy at this point. You can watch me struggle with the weight of it. It keeps falling off my desk. So I figured more fabric so it is less likely to tear through. But it was the same process as doing the yoke flat felled seam. Maybe a little bit easier because it was fatter. And then because it was so fat and you had 3 layers together, it also became a sort of cording channel and helped stiffen up that part a little bit too. Here I'm just making my waistband. I cut it at 4 inches, and I'm taking the raw edges of it, folding it towards the center, and then I will come through and fold it in half again. No, I didn't bother measuring any of this. You can just easily eyeball it. Just don't burn your fingers. And here I am just folding it in half, and now we have one side that will be opened, and that will be what sandwiches the skirt. Press, 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 press. I have gone and finished the waistband, closing it. I did choose to use a much fatter seam allowance than what is normal or usual, what most people would do. This will come in handy for how I want to do the finishing. I chose to do a drawstring because I managed to lose 6 inches in 6 months, and I am still losing inches. So I want something that will be adjustable to my quickly changing body. And so that's why I chose grommets. Grommets are also just sturdier. I could have done a hand-done eyelet, but I happen to have these grommets on hand, and I wanted this to last. So metal grommets. The grommets go and bite into that super fat seam allowance I did, plus the 2 layers of the outer side, which will hopefully make it last longer, because now there are 4 layers crammed in there to hopefully allow the grommets to not rip through. This grommet setter I have, I got it years back when I started ordering grommets, it came as part of a kit. It's a little metal disc with an indentation, and you put one side of the grommet in it, and then you have the metal stick that goes on the other side of the grommet, and then you take your mallet. Don't use a metal hammer, you will damage the thing, and then you just pound it into place. Here I am marking the skirt and the waistband into quarter marks, and then I will gather between the quarter marks. I choose hand gathering because I have a problem with my machine gathers. They like to break when you're right in the middle of the gathers, and you would just lose all the gathers. I could do 2 or 3 lines of stitches, so when one breaks, then you have a safety net, but I found that the amount of time it takes to do the 3 lines of stitches on the machine, I can do the same thing with hand gathering. Plus, with hand gathering, I can choose a very, very thick thread and double it up. Plus, the hand gathering, it just gathers much easier than the machine gathering, at least for me. You do want to keep your stitching pretty small. The smaller the stitch, the smaller the gathers, and it just looks better for your final product. But don't break yourself trying to get those tiny, uber cute, adorable millimeter gathering stitches. I'm now attaching the waistband to the skirt. I lined up all the quarter marks together and pinned them in place, and then I will gather the skirt between those quarter marks so that the skirt width matches up with the width of the waistband. I stitched the inside layer of the waistband to the inside of the skirt, just the 2 layers together, and then I will take the rest of the waistband and wrap it around to the skirt front, encasing the entire skirt. I then stitch through all layers, giving my waistband 2 lines of stitching to hold it on. To make my petticoat adjustable for all skirt lengths, I need to make some binding. These are my little binding makers. I wrote on there what the cut width is because I was tired of trying to memorize what the cut width was, and it only told you what the finish width was. So you take your little binding strips and you feed it through the binder, and as you pull them out, you iron it to press it into shape and make it hold its shape, and just do this over and over again till got to 8 binding strips. To attach the binding to the skirt, I first marked 1/8 marks all along the skirt hem and then the skirt waistband. I did not think that my machine could handle stitching at all through that fat cording, so I had the binding start right above the cording. I backed it off about roughly my thumb width so my machine could get in there. And then I also backed it off from the waistband, again my thumb width, and I just pinned it so it stayed nice and straight. I tucked in the raw edges at the top and the bottom. When I got to the waistband area with all the gathers, I tried to make sure that there was no tucks or puckers, pleats, or anything that would be caught by the binding. I wanted it nice and smooth behind there to make it easier for the cording to get through. Once all 8 bindings were pinned into place, I stitched 3 times on each binding, creating 2 open channels. I also left both ends open for the cording. Once the binding was stitched on, I used this super heavy tapestry needle. It's also been called a doll needle. It is a more blunted needle, but it's very fat, so it's easy to manipulate once it's inside this channel. I fed it through going down from the waistband to the hem, and then it will come back up around to have both ends of the ribbon facing towards the waistband. There was a little bit of struggles trying to get over the cording, but with some perseverance. As you can see, every time I try to undo these gathers to get my needle out, my needle gets sucked right back up in there. But I eventually found the trick of it after 8 times. Once you get your needle out, then you will loop back up to the top on the other side of the channel. There is a stitch line in the middle of there, so you actually have 2 channels. I ended up using this purple ribbon because I had it on hand and I also had enough of it for the entire project. This project has proven to be perfect for stash busting. And once you get your ends through, try to keep the ends even. I did not have enough room. The first side had all the ribbon, not the second side, so I am down at the bottom trying to pull the one side through to give some slack to the other side. I'm using the fat needle to loosen the loop a little bit and give myself some grip. And then once I got them up there, I just tied a small little knot to make sure I didn't lose the ribbon in the middle of the binding, and voila! And here is the finished petticoat. It's not as fluffy as a hooped petticoat. This is the precursor to the hooped petticoat, but as you can see, sufficiently fluffy. And here you can see skirts with petticoat and without petticoat. Definitely a huge difference with. I am quite pleased with its end result. For the waistband drawstring, I originally tried corset lacing or corset cording, but it was very uncomfortable. Even when you put it over a corset, you could just feel it digging in. And then tying it was very difficult. The knot just kept on undoing itself and also undo itself while you were trying to tie it. So I found this fat grosgrain, and fortunately for me, it was matched the ribbon that I already had in there. Definitely stash busting. To make it shorter, you're just gonna pull on all the ribbons that you had put in those binding pieces. Yes, you are going to have to do this 8 times. It seems rather tedious, but for having one petticoat that will work for a bunch of different skirt lengths versus a whole bunch of petticoats, this is definitely worth it for me. I do know you're supposed to have an over petticoat over this to make your outer skirt lay smoother. I know you can see this underneath my skirts currently, but this is just step one. The outer petticoat will come. And here you can see it working on a shorter skirt.